No time was wasted during the school sweep. The group started from the basement and cleared the mirrors up to the rooftop. Everyone had boosted their levels as much as possible, with the exception of Helen, who was deliberately left to advance only through goblin rewards. Since elite monsters based their power on her level, this approach was better. Alex had even suggested keeping her at level 1 while everyone else focused on taking down the opponent in the vice principal's room. The idea was quickly rejected. As the strongest solo class, the knight was needed. "Ready?" Will asked as the four of them reached the Harpy's office. In response, Jace reached into the massive backpack he carried. UPGRADE. Shield has been transformed into Tower Shield. Defense and Durability X5. Unable to bear the weight in his current condition, the jock let the sheet of metal fall to the floor with a slam. The sound echoed along the empty corridors of the school. Thankfully, nothing followed. "What?" he asked. "It's heavier than I thought. You expect me to fight with that?" Helen looked at the item. The only reason she didn't cross her arms was because she was holding an equally large sword. "Might not be a bad idea," Will said. "At least when you activate it." "Lit," Alex agreed. "So we're actually taking the run approach. We need the space." He doesn't. It's not like anyone ever got in the mirror. "Leave it to me, bro," Alex said. "I'm all stocked up. We'll send 100 copies just for the fun of it." That created a terrifying image in Will's mind, but he nodded nonetheless. The extra copies were going to be useful. "All right, do your thing." Mirror copies came into existence. Dozens quickly became hundreds as the entire hall was full with Alex's doubles. Knowing what to expect, Jace pushed through the crowd, making his way to the staircase. He wouldn't be needed for the fight to come. Reluctantly picking up her tower shield, Helen then took a step towards the door. "You could have at least disassembled it," she shouted down the corridor only to get the middle finger from the jock. Not in the least bit impressed, the girl struck the door with her weapon. KNIGHT's BAS8. Damage increased by 500%. Doctor shattered. Only splinters remained. "Hey, sis," Alex protested. "Careful with my copies." "Don't start," she glared at him, then stepped in. A dozen mirror copies followed. "What's her off?" And Alex whispered, "Potentially the real one." "Not sure," Will replied. "Maybe I should have told her that we'd level up before the start." "Nah, bro. She knows that'll make the elites tougher." The goofball's reasoning was correct, but at the same time, he knew nothing about people. Will could have easily called her and explained his plan in greater detail. He should have done so. Instead, he had chosen to keep her in the dark, cutting her off. It probably seemed that the only reason they'd let her tag along was because, as the key holder, they were forced to do so. If only you knew, Will thought. An explosion erupted from inside, throwing Will backwards. It was only through luck and quick reflexes that he managed to twist his body in such a way to avoid a serious injury. Neither the belt nor any other piece of gear proved strong enough to negate the full force of the blast, only decreasing it enough to survive. This was the first time that he'd experienced anything of the sort. Dust filled the air, hurting his eyes and making it impossible to see more than a few steps ahead. A high-pitched tone blocked any other sound, rendering part of his senses useless. "Helen!" he shouted, unable to register even a sound of his words. Adrenaline flooded his bloodstream, numbing the bruising pain throughout his body. Drawing his knife, Will ran forward. Every Alex 10 feet from the door had been shattered. The real one had to be alive, otherwise the loop would have already ended. By that logic, Helen was also supposed to have survived. "Hell!" Will drew his dagger. Even with a large chunk of the wall missing, there was too much dust in the vice principal's office to make anything out. Will held his breath in an attempt to hear anything other than the constant, high-pitched sound. Nothing. Someone tapped him on the shoulder. A mirror copy of Alex had found its way to him, and was trying to explain the situation. Will just stared at it, unable to make anything out. Of all the temporary skills he had obtained, not a single one was associated with sound. Thankfully, his composure was still there. Will reached into his pocket with his free hand and took his phone out. Hell? He typed in and showed it to the mirror copy. Nodding several times, Alex followed suit, taking out his own phone. Alive. You okay? Jace? Will typed again. Okay. Stay here. More mirror copies emerged, rushing by Will as they entered the thick dust. It was at that point that Will heard his first sound. It was a dull clunk, as if a blacksmith was trying to muffle the sound of him striking an anvil. One could barely call it a sound at all, but at least it was an indication that Will's hearing was returning. An object flew out from within the room, aimed straight at Will's head. The boy instantly crouched, just in time for a sharpened metal disc to strike the wall behind him. This wasn't an accident. Someone was aiming to kill him. Barely had he come to that conclusion than he came to another. It was unlikely that an enemy would attack a single time. Will dashed forward just in time to avoid 3 more discs that struck the wall in the spot where he had been. Tossing his phone, the boy drew several of his flying knives, throwing them blindly in the dusty area. Just as he was about to throw the last, a wave of air slammed into the wall behind him, clearing all the dust from the remnants of the room inside. Careful, you idiot, Helen shouted, gripping the tower shield with both hands. There was no sign of the sword. Likely it too was thrown away by the blast. The tightness in Will's chest subsided as he allowed himself a split second of relief. Helen appeared all right. That was all he needed to know. A second figure also became visible, standing 10 feet away from her. Immediately, one could tell it was humanoid, wearing a strange combination of weapons and armor that weren't immediately recognizable. Looking at it, the first thing that came to mind was that their opponent had grabbed a makeshift steampunk suit. Leather and metal protectors covered the person from head to toe. In any other circumstance, Will would have made a joke on the topic. Not now that he had figured out what the being was. Mirror copies appeared out of nowhere, stabbing the elite from all directions. All their attacks managed was to momentarily startle him, causing him to take a few steps back. Blades shattered instantly upon contact, unable to pierce through the jury-rigged armor. Get out of there! Will shouted, hoping that Helen had restored her hearing as well. He's a mirror image. Either her ears were still ringing or the girl ignored him, for she swung the tower shield, slamming it into the elite. The force was enough to bury him in a nearby wall. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of him. The gloves covering the man's hands peeled off as he grabbed the top of the shield, pressing him into the wall. The moment that happened, the entire chunk of metal twisted, covering his arms and torso as if it were ferro-liquid coating a magnet. UPGRADE. Tower shield has been transformed into body armor. Defense and durability X2. He's a crafter. Will threw his poison dagger, aiming at the only unprotected area of the enemy, his hand. POISONED. The blade ripped the skin, but only managed to do so much, before solid steel slid over what remained of the unprotected skin. The dark crafter clasped his hands together, a metallic sphere emerging between them. KNIGHT's BAS8. Damage increased by 500%. Breastplate shattered. Helen kicked the elite in the side, then dashed out of the room. Wasting no time, Will leaped right into her, taking them both out of the crafter's direct line of sight. A second, less potent, explosion followed. Thankfully, no further harm was done. "Keep running," Will said through the pain. "Alex, get us some time." "For real, bro." The reply came instantly as several dozen mirror copies rushed past, heading in the opposite direction. "I lost my sword," Helen said. "He must have changed it into something." "That's a crafter?" "It's tougher than the hidden boss." That wasn't precisely true, but Will understood her point. One had to admit that it was funny how overpowered their own classes were when fighting against them. Then again, eternity held no secrets for mirror images. A high-level crafter, maybe. The pair reached the staircase and rushed down. "What the fuck was that?" Jace asked. He had just been about to lean against the railing when the first explosion had gone off. A dragon? Come along, Will shouted without further explanations. We need to get to the first floor bathroom. Why the fuck? We need to get the chain, and that's the only place I can get it from. As Will's hearing improved, he could hear the sounds of shattering glass in the distance behind him. Minutes ago, he had believed Alex to have gone overboard with the mirror fragments. Now he wasn't sure they would be enough. What's your level? Jace asked Helen as they were running. 7, she replied. Fuck. I knew the good stuff was later on. While I get the chain, you and Helen go to the fire extinguisher, Will said. The big one. I need you to make a weapon for her. You lost your sword? There was a moment of silence. Right. Got it. At the boys' bathroom, the group split up. Will rushed inside while the others continued onwards. Instantly, the boy stopped in his tracks. All the mirrors in the room were shattered in a display that made his heart tighten. Alex, you idiot, Will said beneath the breath. This had never been part of the plan. If anything, Will had insisted that the class mirrors remain intact precisely because of this. He didn't expect to need the chain for the crafter, but he was definitely going to take it for their battle against the boss. Will took the mirror fragment out of his pocket. Tapping on its surface, he slid his finger several times to get to the inventory section, then reached inside. Having fun? A familiar voice asked. Will could tell that it was Daniel's, even if his reflection wasn't visible. Should have warned you about that. Sure. Will placed the fragment on the floor, then continued pulling the chain out. I thought you'd see it. 4 classes, 4 mirror images. You only killed 3. What did you expect there would be? What do you want? Just wanted to wish you the best. Will didn't believe that for a moment. More likely, he was here to remind him of their arrangement again. You don't need to fight him, Danny continued. You poisoned him, so he'll die in 10-20 minutes on his own. Crafters are very susceptible to effects. Then again, most of the other classes are. If that's so, how did you die? The abrupt silence suggested that the topic remained on the sore side. Just don't forget our deal. And don't try to be smart. I can kill you for eternity just as you reach to get your class any class. The final piece of the chain emerged from the fragment. Tossing it to the side, Will then quickly put the fragment away and looked around. There was no indication that anyone was there. Gritting his teeth, then carefully grabbed a less spiked link and pulled the metal mass out of the bathroom.